In the world of tech, in the world of business, in the world of what we do, like change is a constant, right? And so you have to embrace it, and you have to, again, build kind of structure and processes around anticipating change.
I am so happy that you're able to join me on this show. Thank you so much for jumping on.
Thank you so much for having me. I told you before, I'm so proud of you for doing what you're doing, and so excited to have a conversation with you today.
Before I even introduce you, I just wanted to, for the record, if it was not for your leadership and if I hadn't worked under you in your team, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. I think the stuff that I learned from you, it would have taken me decades otherwise. So thank you so much for all the help that you've given me in my career. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. That means a lot. And I think I told you before, an introduction I did for you earlier this week, you're a very special person, and I hold you in the highest regard. So super proud of your career and where you're headed and who you are as a person. So awesome.
Thank you, Kelly. So quickly, brief bio. You were most recently the CIO for Restaurant Brands International, one of the biggest restaurant QSR chains in the world. Before that, I think you spent some time at Abercrombie in a leadership role there and an executive role. And I think before that it was a Hard Rock Cafe. So quickly, what have you been up to lately, and what are you doing nowadays?
Yeah, absolutely. So I left RBI at the end of last year, and really was going to take some much needed time off and spend some time with my family and recharge. I had almost 8 amazing years with the organization, and didn't really expect to take time off and be in quarantine. So I think it gave me more time to kind of think and reflect, and the positives of it. Spend a lot of time with the family. But realized that, I was ready to kind of get back in the game and wanted to kind of take, all the experiences I have and really figure out where my passions were and be able to kind of take on some roles that would make a difference. And so it really landed me in engaging with a few tech startups. So I'm advising them of restaurant tech, and so doing some advisory work on that. And then, got the fortune to land an interim kind of CTO, strategic consulting role with a very prominent restaurant group in New York. So I started that in June and doing that full time. So just, it's a short-term engagement, but really back in the restaurant, different times now because a lot of the restaurants aren't open, and having to kind of think through the new norm and really helping them put their restaurant tech strategy together. So yeah, I'm having a lot of fun.
That's amazing. I think, knowing you, it's, you're always doing things, always executing. So I'm not surprised that you're back in the game so fast.
Yeah.
I think that's what you do best. And, I think quickly also, I never realized how easy you made your job look at RBI, overseeing 20,000 plus locations, the entire tech strategy. I never really appreciated it until I started I took on a bit of a role in a smaller capacity, but similar. And it was then I'm like, wow, Kelly made it look so easy. I'm always curious to know, I'm really interested actually in your particular case, what allowed you to continually progress in your career while many others either got stuck at some point or switched careers. So what is it that you did consistently across your entire career that allowed you to not just progress in your career, but also have the type of impact that you've had at such huge brands?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different things, right? And if you start early in my career, and I have to say I never sought out to be in technology. I was in restaurant operations, and taking a step back from that, I came from an entrepreneurial family, and my dad had a couple, small businesses, small town Minnesota, early on, and so really kind of attribute to that where the work ethic comes in, which I think plays a part in what I did. But at a very early age, he had us playing multiple roles in all of his businesses. And I think as I progressed in my career, I think what helped me progress in my career is that I was never afraid to take on a new role or a new responsibility. And having that kind of self-starting, kind of entrepreneurial kind of initiative, in areas that I wasn't necessarily comfortable in, and not afraid to kind of fail forward. And being the one to raise the hand sometimes for, positions that other people didn't want, it kind of goes through my career. And so, just to talk about when I was, hired after, college, and did some other things for my dad, and then decided to go back into, had to go find a job. Um, I was hired as a restaurant manager for Planet Hollywood. And so after that, after doing a new restaurant opening, I landed into technology by complete dumb luck, because I got assigned the role to be the POS expert for the management staff. Because back then there was no internet, POS was very just basically a little bit smarter electronic cash register. And found out I had a knack for it. And 6 weeks later, I was on the road doing new store openings for Planet Hollywood, and that's how my IT career started. And then just continue to take on more responsibility and continue to learn and continue to grow, which then evolved my career. I think the other part is when I felt like I was starting to get a little bit stale or stagnant, or kind of going into what we sometimes call, maintenance mode, and you feel like you're not kind of providing more kind of value, and you're just kind of getting a little bit content. Then I challenged myself to take on something different or bigger or better. And so the step from Planet to Hard Rock to Abercrombie kind of fit through that same progression. And so I think those were the traits. And then I think it's just about delivering results, right? It's about building high performing teams. And then at the end of the day, it's about execution, as well as, relationships. And I think people undervalue or underestimate, we're a people business at the end of the day, and understanding like what your mission is and who you're trying to help. And I think for being in restaurants, having that empathy of understanding what it's like to be a manager on a Friday night and your POS goes down.
Yeah.
Like when I ran POS, like you just have this kind of over sense of like urgency, because you've been, and you can empathize with what that manager is going through. And I think carrying that kind of passion throughout my career has helped, make me successful throughout.
Yeah, I think you hit on two great points. The first one is, at the end of the day, like, it doesn't matter if it's tech or operations or whatever it is in this world. At the end of the day, it's still people. And unless, I think a lot of people that I've seen who kind of get stuck in a certain situation is because they don't get it. They don't understand that at the end of the day, you need to be able to work with people. So I think that's like spot on, and I've seen that in my career. I think the second point, if I can ask you to kind of dive a little deeper, is you mentioned this thing about taking on roles that other people perhaps don't want to do, or never saying no to something that is hard, or you just thrown into a role. Like, I know 80% of the people will be like, I don't want to do this job. It's not something I signed up for. I think, one of the big reasons that I've seen people, and, one of the prime examples is, I think, your career, you can keep progressing, is because you never say no to something that other people don't want to do, right? So, how do you always get yourself to say yes to a role that might not be sexy?
Yeah, sometimes it's scary, right? But I think you got to turn it around and make it a personal kind of challenge. Like, for me, nothing motivates me more than somebody telling me it's impossible, right? And so for me, it's kind of that inner competitive spirit, right, that we talk about sometimes, in sports and everything else, is that if somebody tells me I can't do something, it just motivates me that much more. And again, not to prove them wrong, but to more prove that nothing in life is impossible. You just got to break it down into small chunks and figure out kind of the right approach to get there, right? Yeah. And I think the other thing that's interesting, and I kind of bring on some life lessons, and my parents were a big influence on my kind of work ethic and kind of my thought. And I think everybody kind of draws from different people. And I look at my mother, who's it's like super frustrating growing up. She was the disciplinary, very hard driven person, but she was a labor and delivery nurse, and she worked in the same hospital full time, and she retired at 79. Wow. She was 57 years in the same hospital, and had loyalty, and during ups and downs, always went to work, and to work till you're 79, crazy, right? My father owned some businesses and ran into some tough times, and ended up during some of the recessions and economic times, and lost his businesses. But it didn't really stop him, and he, to survive, took on roles that people might have said were demeaning, right? Whether it was, he worked as a kind of the custodian at a big rest stop, but he was so proud of that rest stop and worked so hard to make sure it was the cleanest and talked to
Yeah.
everybody and it was well manicured and brought that same kind of work ethic that he had in his own businesses to whatever role he was. And I think that taught me early on that, it doesn't matter what role, you have to give it your all and you're never above a certain role, right? And just
Exactly.
continuing to learn more and kind of take on those responsibilities and approaching it from that humility, I think is really important throughout one's career.
Yeah.
Because we all
That's,
don't get to do what we like all the time, right?
yeah,
But
exactly.
you got to go where the business needs are and find that right balance.
I think that's very powerful. That story. Yeah, I mean, even if you have your own business, even if you're, let's say, CEO of like an amazing startup that's just got a bunch of funding, at the end of the day, there are still things you have to do that most people don't realize looking outside in. That at the end of the day, you still need to do the stuff that people don't want to do, right? And
Yep.
I think a lot of times we only see the stuff that's shining versus all the stuff that goes on in the background. I think this is a great segue. I know you touched on having this competitive spirit. Tell me a little bit about your sports background. Like, what sports did you play? Did you coach as you were, early in your career, and how that had an impact actually on your career in a positive way?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So sports has always been a big part of my life. I think early on, and it's an interesting kind of role reversal in my house. My dad was not interested in sports. My mother and my grandmother were huge fans of the sports, and so it was a connection point with my mom. And we watched football growing up, and I come from Minnesota. I've been a try and true Vikings fan since
You
I
still
was
have
little.
season tickets?
I have season tickets.
Yeah.
Still have the season tickets, and never miss a game on a Sunday. But love all sports. And I started playing sports early on. I played basketball and volleyball, and and I really, I was never the best at any one of the sports,
Yeah.
but I think it was one of those things that I think it just helped build some of those kind of core fundamentals of teamwork and kind of working together with somebody to kind of create a common goal. When I was in, not good enough to kind of move on into collegiate sports, but when I was in college, I got the opportunity to start some coaching. And so, in college, I coached a kind of middle school boys basketball team. I can tell you it was really interesting because the first kind of practice when they introduced me, the fathers of the team weren't all that excited. They're like, oh, some woman coaching our team. We did really well. I think we ended up taking second.
Wow.
And then, kind of fast forward, my daughter got involved in sports and I started coaching and assistant coach with her. I think an interesting story is, she was on the basketball team. She wasn't very good and she didn't practice very hard and she didn't put in the effort. And we joke about it today because she didn't get to start because she didn't deserve to start. And she's, 15, 16 years later, she still brings it up of, my mom never started me, but I think it's one of those things that you have to put in the work to deserve to start. You don't have to be the best, but you have to put in the work. So yeah, that part of sports has always been part of me in coaching. And then I think the other part for me is just about, like, I've always been into fitness and making sure that I stay healthy. And for me, like, fitness and health has been my balance, my release. And so the time I spend for myself every day to go on a walk or, used to run or do Pilates or what those things, it's my time to kind of recharge, clear my head, and really kind of prep myself for the day, or if it's at night, to kind of wind down from the day and just kind of clear my head and get myself ready for the next day. So super important along the way.
I'm trying to find a new way to explain this. Maybe you can help me. But every time someone tells me that they don't have time to work out or stay fit because they have too much work or they're in a position that's a leadership position, I always call it bull because, I mean, you're a prime example, right? Mm-hmm. You've done so much and you still make time for fitness to stay healthy, and you've been doing this your entire career. Whereas a lot of people are like, I really want to do it, but I think at the end of the day, people just like to make excuses.
Yep, no, absolutely.
So like, if you want to make time, if you want to do a workout, you can definitely find time.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to make time, right? And I think it's about priority and yourself. Like for me, I know when I work out, my stress levels decrease, and I'm a better leader when
Performance is better.
and my performance is better, right?
Yeah.
Because I just feel better about who I am. But, some days it's 2 hours that I find time to work out and I get up at, a little bit extra in the morning. And some days it's 30 minutes, but at least I feel like I kind of accomplished something and I feel better about myself. And I think people get overwhelmed because I think you have to put so much time into it and just do little things every day until it becomes a habit, right? And I think that's the biggest thing is, everybody, it's just no different than coming up a New Year's resolution and everybody starts gung ho in January because they try and do too much and then it falls off. Don't you can't just go from 0 to 100. Like figure out the right path, and then it'll just continually be the habit, right? And so I think
Exactly.
that's what people have to find.
You said you make small habits and they stick with you and it becomes second nature. What are a couple of things that you've learned over time in terms of, let's say, from sports, from coaching, from fitness, that you have, one of them is a byproduct of it, which allows you to, decrease your stress levels and perform better. What is actually something that you've learned from these experiences and applied in business, in technology, that had a direct impact on some of the huge results you've driven and delivered over your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of them is disciplines and routines, right? And I think what we do in IT and technology, there's a creative part about it and the innovation part about it, but just the core kind of management and execution of an IT operation comes down to discipline, routines, and consistency, right? The people want predictability. I want to walk up to my computer and I want it to work. I don't want to have to think about it, right? And I always use the analogy that technology, whether it's in the restaurant or the corporate office or, who's ever engaging with it, the consumer, it should be like turning on the faucet. It should just work, right? And so the only way you're going to get through that is through the fundamentals and kind of, that foundation. And so I think that's one of them. And I think the other thing from sports that you bring into play is, again, it's about team and it's about chemistry of team. And as a leader, making sure that chemistry, not everybody, I mean, people are people and people have big personalities and people have differences of opinion and conflict is going to happen, but how you navigate through that. And as a leader, being able to recognize when it's got to a point where it's like detrimental to a team, because some people are difficult to make some of those changes and having to make some of those difficult changes. And then continuing to deal with people on a one-on-one basis. I think oftentimes, especially kind of inexperienced leaders, try and manage everybody the same, and that's just not possible. If you can't, it's really about micro. And so, kind of leading and long-winded answer, the other part is just get to know each one of your players like you would on a sport and figure out their strengths and weaknesses to put the right game plan together. And I think that is so critical. And I think that's where a lot of people miss.
That's well said. I was just writing an article actually about how you should almost hire your team like a football team. And what you said is almost exactly what I was, trying to articulate in that article. It's like, you need to understand who your players, and I think the other part that I've seen you do really well, Kelly, and maybe you can touch on that, is building a team that works well together versus putting a bunch of great people together and hoping it works. Right?
Yeah.
So what's how do you do that, and how does that kind of taken from sports teams, football teams into, let's say, technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important, right? And I think, like I said before, chemistry is important and how people kind of interact and making sure, you never want to put teams together where everybody thinks the same way, and so you want to have some of that healthy tension. But as a leader, you got to recognize when some of those when it becomes unhealthy, right? And when that chemistry isn't there. And again, I think you got to be tough enough to either have those courageous conversations or make those decisions to take people in and out of teams. And you see it all the time. And whether it's football, or whoever, sometimes you get people who might think that they're the superstars, and they probably are, but they don't play well with the other kids, right? And so you just. Yeah. It's more detrimental than having that star player on the team. And I think as a leader, being able to recognize that is super important. And, it's about the kind of long-term game, not sometimes those quick wins.
Short term. The one thing that I think people don't realize is that every year, even Tom Brady has to try out again from level 1 as a rookie quarterback might be in the same training camp. I think a lot of times in business, people just because they deliver results, they kind of do get the maintenance mode turned on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing I think, that you can probably learn from sports is like, it doesn't matter what you've done, what results you've delivered. That's in the past. Now, from almost like a meritocracy that I think works really well is like, how do you now start again and get back on the horse
Mm-hmm.
and get those results delivered again? On that note, how have you been always able to just stay on, keep that motor running versus getting complacent?
Yeah, I mean it's hard, right? And we all get into kind of those kind of highs and lows sometimes, or where things get a little, you get into a little bit low, but you've got to motivate yourself and you got to challenge yourself. And the other thing too is I think you got to be um, it's important to understand kind of what motivates you and what drives you, and understand that like
Yeah,
you talked about the shiny new toy, like work's not always going to be exciting. And going back to those fundamentals, nobody likes to do drills every day. Nobody likes to go through the fundamentals, but you got to understand the value in those. I
yeah,
think though, when you get to the point of when you're not challenged anymore, and it's both personal, but you can start to see that you're probably not giving your best for an organization, then it's time to like sit back and make some decisions, and challenge yourself by making a change, or challenging yourself to try and find more things to do within the organization. And going back to what we talked about before, I've stayed motivated because I've always tried to take on more and new things, to make sure that I don't get into that kind of lull. But to think that everybody stays up at here all the time, and I think it's about ebb and flows, and right. And when in our environment, you're going to have peaks and you're going to have valleys, and you got to enjoy the valleys, but you got to just thrive during the peaks. And finding that kind of balance that way is super important.
I think one thing that the great leaders do is understanding their emotions and knowing when they're going to be hitting the valley,
Mm-hmm.
so they know what they got to do. Like an athlete, you go and listen to some music that pumps you up, or positive self-talk. I think it's so
Yep.
important to know when you're going to hit the low, so you can either do one of these things that helps you, or maybe get some support or get some help. So definitely, I think that's something that I, go through almost like every month, or every, even multiple times a day, depending on the task, right? And it's
Yeah.
just a part of the game.
And I think recognizing that's normal part of the game, as opposed
Yeah,
to getting yourself all frustrated, and also not just coming to the quick decision of, oh, I'm bored, I'm gonna, or make a
yeah,
rash decision, right? Because everybody goes through that. I mean, we're all human and have emotions.
exactly.
And so just figuring out kind of what that right thing is to kind of relight your spark.
You've been through many organizations throughout your career. I think the most recent role that you've held in a 3G culture, everybody knows that it's known for change. It's known for a lot of. I mean, you've been through two mergers there, and
Yep.
brought two different brands and made one huge brand. I think that's, first of all, it's probably the best merger I've seen from a tech standpoint, and the fastest. So amazing to see you do that. But how have you been able to manage and continue to move on in a culture that's built on change? I think that's one thing that a lot of people have a tough time with. So what have you done, and how do you always, consistently deliver results in that kind of environment?
Yeah, I mean, you've probably heard me kind of harp this all the time, and talking to the team is, in the world of tech, in the world of business, in the world of what we do, like change is a constant, right? And
Yeah,
so you have to embrace it, and you have to, again, build kind of structure and processes around anticipating change. Most people, like, change is the hardest thing for people to do, right? And so they fear it. And so just first of all, recognizing that change is like the one constant that's going to happen. And then figuring out how to navigate through that, I think is the other part of it. I'm sure I've made the teams a little bit upset sometimes, because I always say the technology is not the hard part, right? Anything we
yeah,
do, that we can figure out. It's really the influencing, the negotiation, and the change management of putting new technologies into an environment, and changing the way people operate on their routines. Going back to the routines, people have routines, and all of a sudden you come in with a new technology. It might be the best thing in the world, but it's new and it takes time to get used to. And so being able to kind of guide people through that change, I think is super important. And so once people embrace the change and don't see it as this like scary, monster that you have to go through, and then success comes.
I think, with obviously with the digital disruption that's been huge in the past 5 to 10 years, and now with COVID, there's a lot of recent graduates and young professionals that are facing a lot of uncertainty, right? There's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of uncertainty. Whatever they went to even school for now, maybe the industry might not even be there in the next 5 years. Change is the constant, right? The only constant.
Mm-hmm.
What is one rule that you've applied to help you navigate uncertainty, navigate when things, might not be there in the future that you maybe prepared for, but, you tell yourself it's going to be fine? Like, what is some advice that you can give somebody that right now is facing uncertainty?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, again, I go back to the fear of the unknown, and you've got to embrace that change. But I think you also have to be willing to look at new opportunities in different lights, right? So take a step back in my career. I went to school for finance and economics. Then I was in restaurant operations, right? And then I landed in technology. It happened to serve me pretty well these last years, right? But if at that moment in time when I was given the opportunity to be that like POS on-site expert, and I said no, I wanted to be the, some other, kind of in the opening team, like my IT career wouldn't have happened. So don't be afraid to do something different. And taking a step back to go forward isn't a bad thing, right? And then I think the other thing is like things come full circle, right? And so nothing lasts forever. And I think just putting that in perspective that, this is a short-term problem, and just kind of stay confident, stay resilient, and continue to push forward.
Life is long.
Is the important life, and I'm glad you say that, because people always say life is short, and I'm like, no, life is actually long, right? Long. God willing, life is long, and so what you decide today is not meant forever. Nothing's written in stone for the rest of your life. So just be flexible.
The connection from football into sports. Football, you might be in a game which is a home opener, which doesn't really matter, versus the AFC Championship game. The level of pressure is different depending on the game, right? But when you're in that moment in the situation, or if you're a player that performs well, there's a way that great leaders and great players handle pressure. I want to know from you, how do you handle pressure when something's on the line?
Yeah, no, and it's hard, right? But I think it goes back to perspective. And I earned early in my career, and I don't want to, I've been fortunate to work in industries where the decisions we were making aren't saving lives, right? And so, I probably at Hard Rock, I said once, if I said, 10,000 times, and probably throughout, Abercrombie and everywhere else, like we're serving burgers and t-shirts, right? We're selling t-shirts, or we're selling coffee, right? Exactly. Right? Like and I don't want to say it's not, you don't bring urgency when things are going bad, or there's something that you have to get done, but you can't just get so worked up that it's life and death, right? And I think, a good example of that, and I think good leaders can, trust me, I know, when things break, I feel that urgency because I hate the impact that we're having on the business or the customer.
Especially the front line,
Yeah, but no offense, like shit happens, and computers and systems don't tend to break at the most ideal time. But it doesn't do any good if you freak out in front of everybody, and a good leader has to lead through the incident. You can do the postmortems after, right? And most people say, why did this break? Why? It's like, don't worry about that. We'll figure that out later. Let's just figure out what we need to do to get fixed. And screaming and yelling and, having, like, it doesn't help.
It does more harm. I think when the team sees a leader react very negatively, it actually impacts the team much worse than they actually might realize, because your team almost drives off the energy of the leader.
Yeah, you have to be calm, right? A coach has to be, they have to show passion and energy, right? And making sure that people understand kind of the impact of what's happening, and making sure that you have the right plan forward. Early in my days at, Burger King, we moved the entire data center. And it didn't go well. And if it was one of those things that every step along the way, something could have happened, including like moving the moving truck from 2 miles away, and there was a major accident and the truck was stuck for hours, right? And like then it got the implementation, it just, something went awry and it took days. And we literally brought the corporate environment, like it took days to recover. The good news is the restaurant still,
Yeah.
served. We're able to, deal with the guests.
Yeah.
And, I remember afterwards, and I was, I had only been at the company for a year and, had the support of the leadership team. And I remember the CEO at the time recognized that as a positive, not because of the impact we had on the business, obviously
Yeah.
that wasn't good, but it was the resilience and the commitment of the entire team to stick it out for like days. And I mean, when I talk days, I mean, we were sleeping at the office, but nobody gave up until we got ourselves back to where we needed to be. And I think it's a good example of like stuff's going to happen, but it's how you respond to it and the response that's going to be the true measure of your success throughout kind of these kind of journeys that you go through or these tough times throughout
Yeah.
your career.
I think a lot of times I've seen people give up at the last minute when they were so close
Yeah.
to pushing through. And sometimes it's a shame because like, man, you almost had it if you just kept going. And I think that's one of the things that you just mentioned is like, you kept going, sleeping at the office, working hard, and things get better at the end of the day.
Yep.
How can somebody that's right now is facing that, is getting beat up, everything is going really bad for them, and they might not have the support
Yeah.
of the leadership? What's one thing they can do today to keep going, keep fighting, especially in a
Yeah.
technology role?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to find that within yourself, right? And I know a lot of famous athletes always say that final moment you got to find whether it's I know a great fighter said you got to find that like last couple seconds of a round to throw that last punch, or you look at football players, you've got the last 2 minutes that you got to do the 2 minutes, but you first you got to find it in yourself, and you got to again know that you're going to get through it. Like you're that close, and just get yourself over the edge. And it's also about leaning on your teammates, right? I think that's the other part. Like, some roles are individual contributors, but they're still part of a larger team, and you've got to find that kind of balance with your team. And I think that's how you get through it.
Yeah, I think getting the right team around you and the right support system is definitely something that's very helpful. On on a different topic, Kelly, when I want to go back to one of the examples, when you said you started in your career and you accidentally started and taking over the POS, and at that point technology wasn't that big, it wasn't really changing the industry, right? How do you consistently stay up with the industry? How do you always make sure that you were staying ahead of the game? Like, what is one thing that you did? Was it learning? Was it courses? Was it meeting the right people? Was it networking? What was that thing that allowed you to then say, "This is what I want to do. Let's go full speed"?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some reading. I mean, I'm going to admit I'm not a big, like, I never did a lot of reading, but I think it was listening to partners, listening to the industry, and most importantly, hiring really smart people that were bringing those fresh ideas, right? And I probably throughout my career, I mean, I was so fortunate because I worked with some of the greatest people. But they always kept challenging me to kind of bring kind of where we wanted to go from a tech perspective. And I think where I could bring the balance is that I could, whether it's instinctively or through experience, or one of my skill sets was being able to really understand if that truly was going to have an impact on the business, and making sure that we would just, like I said, weren't chasing the shiny toy, and could kind of vet those ideas out. But I think it comes down to listening, and that's where I learned the most.
What is a one thing that you do when you hire someone? What's the one thing that has to be there versus this hard skills?
Yeah, I think it's for me, it's grit, right? And I think it's one of those things. I want somebody, like, I think you can teach people technical, you can't teach people work ethic, right? And I want somebody that can roll up their sleeves and dig in and get something done. I mean, we were doing a big project when I left RBI, and I was doing I was taking support calls. I was having one-on-one conversations with some of our franchisees, but it was the right thing to do. And sometimes you got to go deep, and sometimes, again, you got to be able to have that kind of versatility. But I want somebody who's a self-starter and hungry, as opposed to not necessarily always the smartest person, right?
Yeah, I hear a lot that I'm not in technology. I didn't go to school for technology, so people almost shy away.
Hmm.
When in reality, I think as long as you have grit and you have the ability to Google something to learn, and you want to actually learn something, I think you can probably learn 80% of the technical skills
Hmm.
that you need on your own, right? I think it's the ability
Yep.
to go ahead and have the drive, as you mentioned.
Yep. I mean, I learned to configure point of sale servers in a hotel room in Maui, and it was not pretty. And I read a lot of books and I figured it out, and like a lot of calls, and early on in my career. But I think you still need to have the people who are really smart, obviously really strong from a technical perspective. But you also want those people to be able to understand the business, right? And if people can't understand kind of the mission and what you're trying to do, then you're not kind of all moving in the same direction to get to the ultimate goal, right? And so they have to understand kind of the purpose.
And you got to align the vision to the mission.
Yep.
I
Well
always say.
said.
So, one final question before
Mm-hmm.
we end today's podcast. For a lot of young professionals that are in technology roles or recent graduates who want to get into a role, whether technology or whatever else, or even somebody that is not in technology but needs to be able to now become digital first because it is an industry that is going to become digital. What's the one piece of advice that you would like to give a room full of people listening today?
Yeah, I mean, don't be afraid, right? It's not every role in technology is about like coding, right? I didn't code. A lot of it's about project management. It could be about, requirements and business analysts and really figuring out how to bridge the gap between the business and really what that kind of end customer experience is, or the own staff experience. So technology is more than just bits and bytes these days, right? It's about the experiential side of it as well too. So there's everything you turn to, from a support role, like everything is tech. Sometimes things that really aren't tech get lumped into tech, like my air conditioning's not working, or something plugged in is not working. But everything today is tech. And so don't be afraid. That's Tech is the core of everything that we do today. So
Thank you so much, Kelly. It was wonderful having you on the show. I learned a lot today.
uh,
Again, hearing, listening to some of the answers, and thank you again so much. Really appreciate you being on the show.
thanks, Tanvir. I really appreciate it. I wish you all the best in your new endeavors.
Thank you, Kelly.
Talk soon.
Team, remember to like, subscribe, and share with a friend, and visit tanvirbango.com for a ton of free content and exercises.